for the benefit of all sentient beings. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. As we make our way gingerly towards Tantra, or into Tantra, and we have been reading some chapters from Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism as they pertain to this subject. And tonight we're going to talk about the Bodhisattva path, Michael and I. So, as we tread the path, we start out at the Hinayana level, and we are learning Hinayana teachings, which have to do with understanding what suffering is, among other things, the Four Noble Truths, that there's a path leading from suffering, what that path is, 3 marks of existence, and so forth, the 6 realms, all these kinds of things. And we start out by practicing the Hinayana meditation practice of shamatha, which is a practice very, very having to do with simplicity and precision. So, for instance, it involves focusing one's mind on an object of meditation, perhaps. Might be the breath, could be a mantra, could be anything. And we do this very precisely. Ultimately, we begin to combine it with the Mahayana practice, the more Mahayana practice. Well, it's a Hinayana practice too, of insight. It's called vipassana. Vipassana literally means in Sanskrit, superior seeing. Shamatha means cultivation of peace. When we practice shamatha, focusing our mind one-pointedly on an object, it has certain benefits. One is that we begin to see for the first time, perhaps when we first start meditating, to what an enormous extent we spend our lives lost in dreams, thoughts of all kinds, not here in the present moment, but often thoughts about the past and the future. It's the first benefit of shamatha. It's the simplicity meditation of focusing on an object. When you try to focus on an object, suddenly all these thoughts come up, right? The second benefit of shamatha is that we begin to develop the ability to bring ourselves back from dream into the present. I forgot what the third one is. I always do this. Do you remember, Barry? The third benefit? Thoughts. That's all. It'll come to me. And then we begin to combine it with vipassana, which is insight meditation. So what he says is in the beginning of this chapter is that insight meditation, you see, is expanding our awareness, not just on one narrow thing, but suddenly we're coming back into the present moment and our awareness is broad, wide. And we're allowing a gap, always, a gap in our thoughts. In both practices, we're allowing a moment when we're not thinking and we're coming back into awareness here and now. So we begin to appreciate, he says, the clear precision and simplicity of our lives. This is still Hinayana meditation. Why? How? Because we're coming back from dreams. Dreams are full of anxiety. They're very repetitive. And they are always about me and somebody else, stories. And we come back from these into this awareness of this, here and now. This is the practice of vipassana. And so we begin to penetrate what he calls, as he puts it, the 5th skandha. The 5th skandha is the last development of ego. And it has basically two levels. At the outer level, it's full of discursive thought. You're constantly lost in commentary, thoughts, past and future, always. This cloud of discursive thought that blurs out our awareness of what's going on right now. You could be walking down the street thinking about something anxious, your financial situation, your love life, who knows what, and not even notice what's going on around you very much, just barely. And then suddenly a horn goes off, maybe on the street, and wakes you up. You come back like this. And suddenly you can see, it's a beautiful sunny day. There are all kinds of people around me. I hadn't noticed them. I was so lost in the dream. That's what's called cutting through the beginning of the fifth skandha, the outer layer of discursive thought, the cloud of gossip that fills our minds. Then next down in the fifth skandha, still the last of the 5 developments of confusion, is emotions. Emotions are energetic. Thoughts are just thoughts. You can be saying 2 + 2 is 4. You can be saying what's for lunch. But suddenly emotions have a lot of energy. I hate that person. I love this person. I'm very worried about so-and-so. And there's an emotion. But these emotions, they're comprised of 2 parts. Energy, the energy of push-pull. You don't like it. You want it away from you. You love it. You want to pull it towards you. You're indifferent to it. You remain neutral. Those are the energy aspects of emotions. And they combine with stories. That person said something nasty to me, and suddenly you feel anger. This person was very nice to me, and suddenly you feel gratitude or attraction or who knows what. So the words and the energies, which are the emotions, go together. And in fact, they work on each other. So sometimes, for instance, you're driving your car and somebody pulls out in front of you, and you jolt like that. That's a huge emotion of fear. And then suddenly you're putting words to it. You're saying, that son of a gun, they weren't even looking, and what a terrible driver, I'm going to, blah, blah, blah. And then you've got to, so the emotion, the energy can provoke the words, and the words can provoke the energy. That person said something nasty to me. I don't like them anymore. They're the words that are provoking the energy. And this is the kind of you might say that as he puts it here, the thoughts, the words, are like the blood circulating in your body. And the energies, these emotions, are like the muscles, that lift your arm and punch and do whatever you're going to do. And together, these create emotional states which have stories and energies, and which are described in the Buddhist psychology, and they're called the 6 realms. Now, there are 3 main levels of confusion. And the first one is called the realm of desire, and in it, it's subdivided into 6 in the realm of desire. Above that is the realm of pure form, and above that is the formless realm. Those 2 are still confused samsaric realms, but they're much, much nicer, because what they are concentration states. They're like trances that one can put oneself into by focusing totally one-pointedly on an object. It's like taking drugs. They're called the dhyanas, those states. The states, there are 4 in each one of the formless realm and the realm of pure form. They're also called the God realms. There's also a God realm in the realm of desire. So let's talk about the realm of desire, because we have been warned against the realm of form and the realm of pure form. Why? They're very pleasurable, and they're cul-de-sacs. They're dead ends, and you can get stuck in them for a long time. So we're warned against those practices. Sometimes I asked Trungpa Rinpoche, I said once, would it ever be useful for someone to do the practices of the form and formless realm, master that kind of concentration? And he said, yes, but only after you have an excellent understanding of shunyata, which is what we're coming to next class, which means reality. In other words, you don't want to do these practices and get sucked into them. You want to know what's really real and where they fit. And I said, well, why would you? I want to do them in any event. And he said, to cultivate flexibility of mind. And I understood what that meant to be, that there are beings in those realms. And if you can experience what they're experiencing, you can help them. You can be a sage for them, as it were. And in fact, there are lots of stories about great teachers like Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who some of you might have known or know of. He was a great friend of Trungpa Rinpoche and died in about 1990. Probably the greatest teacher in Tibetan Buddhism in his day. And there are lots of stories about him finding yogis who'd gotten stuck in these formless realms, form and formless realms, and waking them up and kicking them out and telling them, you got to get on with your journey, because they were wasting time. So let's talk about the 6 realms, because that's where we live. This is the realm of, it's called the Kama Dhatu. Dhatu means space or area of desire, Kama. Maybe you've heard about the Kama Sutra. It's a famous Hindu text about how to have sex. But this is the Kama Dhatu, the realm of desire. And in it, there are 6 subdivisions. The sort of highest one, they're all confused, is the God realm. And the God realm is for people who have arrived. They sort of a definition of being in the God realm is you feel that you've got it made. A lot of people think movie stars are in the God realm, although there are plenty of neurotic and unhappy movie stars. But there's, I remember that scene in, oh well, never mind, it's just a movie. And so the real quality of being in the God realm is extraordinary pleasure. They say of the gods that everything they see is beautiful, everything they smell is perfume, everything they taste is ambrosia. They make love with a glance instead of having to go through all the messy procedures that ordinary human beings do. And they're very powerful. And they're somewhat stupid because they can't appreciate suffering enough. And so there are lots of stories about the gods being up in heaven. That's where the gods live, right? And looking down on earth and watching the Buddha. And some god sort of says, well, I don't understand what he's doing, but I'm going to rain down a lot of flowers on him because I like him. That kind of story. So below the God realm is the realm of the jealous gods. And the jealous gods are people who want to get into heaven. And they are warriors. They are storming the gates of heaven one way or another. They're very jealous of the God realm. And you might meet these kinds of people. I think of, I used to do a lot of coaching in New York, and I had some clients who were Wall Street guys, and even women, but the women had a harder time, to say the least, on Wall Street. And they were very much felt like jealous gods. These are people who want to become billionaires, and they can see right next door, there's the guy in the billionaire who's got the office, and they want to storm that gate and get into his office or take it from him. Or in one way or another, they want to get as rich as he is. And so there's this quality of envy and aggression that characterizes the God realms. In fact, each realm has its own emotion that characterizes it. The realm of the gods, the emotion is pride, and it encompasses a certain amount of stupidity. In the jealous God realm, the emotion is envy. You're envious of the gods. And below that is the human realm. And the human realm is the realm of passion. It's a passion for all things. You might be a great gourmet, and you have this tremendous ability to appreciate food and cook it. You might be an artist. You might be a lover, a great person who's just involved with sex. You might be all kinds of things, but it has to do with the quality of appreciation and passion and love and pleasure that comes with all that. And that is the main emotion that dominates the human realm. And below that is the animal realm, which is the realm of stupidity. Animals are very one-pointed. They just put one foot in front of another, and they aren't capable really of complicated intellectualization. And they are really just pursuing their material needs and wants in a very straightforward, dumb way, dumb in the sense of not being complicated. So you could say it's dumb, but it's also very simple. We'll come back to this. Below that is the realm of the hungry ghosts. Hungry ghosts are individuals who feel they're dominated by hunger. They feel that they are lacking, that they can see that other individuals have what they want. So there's an equality of envy there, but there's a real quality of poverty. That I'm such a poor person. I'm just, couldn't you possibly throw me a few crumbs? And jealous gods, hungry ghosts, are depicted as beings that have enormous bellies, tiny little necks, and tiny little mouths. And so the idea is that they've got this enormous belly that creates a huge amount of hunger, but they can only take a tiny little bit of sustenance in at a time, like a grain of rice down through that tiny mouth, or a drop of liquid, into that tiny mouth down the neck. And it never begins to be enough. So they're always hungry. And you might have met people like this. I remember a fellow I knew in college who every time he came up to me or anybody else, I always felt like he was just hungry. He was just sort of sucking up. He was wanting some kind of affirmation and approval and inclusion, the feeling of hunger, which we were happy to give him, but couldn't satisfy that hunger. And below that is the last of the 6 realms, the hell realm. And the hell realm is the realm of anger, hatred, fear. You're afraid for your very existence, and much less your well-being. And everything you see, not everything, but tons of threat, lots of threats everywhere. And so you're constantly on guard, you're constantly doing battle, you're constantly engaged in the heat of battle. And the hell realm has actually different levels, 18, supposedly. And the first, I forget how many, 9 maybe, are hot. They're hot hells. And it's like, you're in a lake of boiling oil. And then the bottom levels, the worst hell realms, are freezing cold, like to the point where you can barely move. It's so cold. And they're all based on aggression. So the emotion of the hell realm is aggression, of the hungry ghost realm is a feeling of poverty. The animal realm is stupidity, just stream straight ahead. The human realm is passion. The jealous god realm is envy, and the god realm is pride. And they're all confused. These are unenlightened beings. Now, what he says is that first of all, and you have to understand, there are 3 ways in which these realms manifest. The first is physically. So we're born into the human realm, right? We're all human beings. We've got human bodies. And your pets are born into the animal realm, right? And the animals that I can see out here in the woods, the bear and the coyote and the fox, they're born into the animal realm. So that's one level, the realm you're born into. And we really don't see much of the God realms, the pure God realms, because they're sort of invisible to us, and the jealous God, and the hungry ghost, and hell realm. Now, the second level of understanding the realms is that they are a picture of the psychology that a person can have. So you can have a person in a human body who has the mentality of a hungry ghost, as I just described, this fellow that I knew in college, or that has the mentality of a hell being. I mean, you can see people on the streets of New York walking around talking to themselves and angry and making gestures, and they are in some kind of another mental place. So these realms can be pictures of an ongoing psychology that endures actually for long periods of time. It could be your neurosis. You could be in the God realm. And you feel like you've got it made, and the gods have very little ability to sympathize with other suffering beings. And you could have the mentality, you could be a human being with the mentality of a jealous God, like those Wall Street guys that I described, who's constantly envying the people who are richer. But you could also be born into these realms. So there are actual realms that you can be born into when you die, and you could become a jealous god or a god. And there are lots of stories about them in the scriptures. And the third level of understanding these realms, and last, is that now and you are all human beings. We're born into a human body. Who knows what mentality you've got or I've got? We could figure it out, think about it. Maybe I've got the mentality of a jealous God. But nonetheless, and that will go on for months, if not years, that psychological mentality, that neurosis, could last your whole life, or it can change. But then there's what happens day to day, moment to moment. You're walking down the street, you meet someone and they insult you, and suddenly you're full of anger. You're experiencing the hell realm. You run into an old friend and it's wonderful, and suddenly you're feeling enormous pleasure and love, and you're either in maybe the human realm or the God realm even. So we have these moments, these 6 moments of 6 different styles of momentary emotion. And in order to work with these realms, see, these realms are all based on dream, right? Dreaming. That person's my enemy, that person's somebody I admire, this person's somebody I love, whatever it might be. They're based on dreams. And in order to work with them, we have to come back from dream. So that's the shamatha element. And then we have to begin to see this world really as it is, stripped of those concepts, stripped of those value judgments, like the envy of the other person or the admiring of the other person or whatever it might be. And that is vipassana, awareness practice. And so he says that in order to work with the realms, we need a more panoramic view. We need to come back and expand our awareness into what's happening now in the moment, this wide world. This is vipassana, becoming aware not only of the precise details, which is shamatha, but also of the situation as a whole. Awareness of space, the atmosphere, the environment in which precision occurs. This environment in which precision happens. So we come back into this space and we see what's on your computer screen precisely, aware, awake, clear, without comment. As soon as we get into comments about it, we start losing it. He says it develops into awareness of the overall patterns of our fantasies rather than focusing on the details. So we begin to see how our neurosis, our fantasies, and how they arise and play out. And this is called Mahavipassana, great Vipassana. We begin to really expand and see everything that's going on in the present moment, both physically and in terms of the senses, and also what's going on in our minds. We discover that we don't have to struggle with our projections, with our dreams, that they are our own creation, and that we can let them be and not become lost in them, not act them out. We can see them. You see this, if we don't see that you're having this dream, you're trapped in it, and you're bound to act it out. That son of a gun, I'm going to get even with that person. I'm going to tell them what I think of them. I'm going to do whatever, blah, blah, blah. As soon as you see it, then you have the option of stepping out of it, back into awareness in this present moment, of letting it go, of acting according to what is instead of according to the dream. He says this insight is prajna, clear seeing. Prajna means transcendent wisdom. Why is it transcendent? Because it's not lost in the dreams. It's just here, now. We see this, what's going on in the moment, and we see the dreams and let them go. Until we, every time when we do a meditation and I or Barry or somebody says, just see what you're thinking in your back. That's it. When we see what we're thinking, we are no longer caught in it. We are able to rest in awareness if we choose. But until we see what we're thinking and see that we're thinking, we're just lost in one dream, the dreaming going on like a television show, like a movie. We're absorbed in it. He says, when you begin to actually come back and appreciate this present moment, it can produce intense joy. This joy is the joy, it's a fundamental joy. The more you do this, you begin to really unlock the mechanism of ego and suffering and jail, the jail of our own minds, and begin to discover this world as it really is, which is what we're going to come to next class with Shunyata, the description of Shunyata. And that discovery of Shunyata and the discovery and the ability to shift your allegiance into this world as it truly is, instead of as we hope and fear it to be, produces immense joy, immense freedom. And this is the entrance into the Bodhisattva path. It's called the first bhumi, the first stage of the Bodhisattva path. And it has a name. The name is pramudita, which means great joy. Because fundamentally, when we really begin to understand this, we are discovering freedom. Freedom from the suffering and imprisonment of samsara in our own minds. Freedom in the ability to come back and shift our loyalty from the stories that we tell ourselves to this present moment, which is free, open, has no dimensionality to it, has no implications. It's what it is. He says, then we enter the Bodhisattva path, the Mahayana, the great vehicle, the path of warmth and openness. Now we are aware that everything is taking place in a vast expanse of space between us and objects. Anything can happen in that space. It all just depends on coming back again and again. This is our practice, to come back to this awareness now, this vipassana. And this is what I intend to focus on a bit in retreat when we go into this weekend, because this is what our practice has to be really for the rest of our lives. And I mean for the rest of our lives and into death. This is the preparation for death. Because if you go into death without this, then you go into death frightened and afraid and the victim of your own dreams. And that's a terrible way to die. But the recommended way to die is to go into it awake, here, present, now, relaxed, aware, awake and ready for anything that comes. There's no battle. We are not imposing our conceptual ideas, names, and categories on experience, but we feel the openness of space in every situation. And I think when I hear those words, I thought immediately of a neighbor with whom I'm having a fight, a contretemps, mild, but nonetheless, when I think of her, I go like this, and I'm not doing what he says. I'm reacting emotionally to her. And what does it do? Well, it provokes the same thing in her. She sees my anger or my aggression or my fear or whatever it is, and it provokes the same thing in her, and it goes back and forth. He says, so awareness becomes very precise and all-encompassing. Mahavipassana meditation means allowing things to be as they are, which needs no effort on our part, because things are as they are. It's like, you don't have to try and make them that way. They already are that way. They are as they are. And all we're doing is coming back from the dreams into what's happening right now. Ideally, this practice is utterly, utterly effortless. There is no effort. When you come back to pure awareness in the present moment, zero effort. Because It's just here. It's already here. He says, and so we begin to really appreciate openness and space. So the Mahayana path is the open way, the wide path. It involves open-minded willingness to allow oneself to be awake, to allow one's instinct to spring out. Here we don't deliberately allow a gap, I'm reading from him, but we communicate and then just space out, so to speak. We just come back and relax. Here we are. Effortless. Let be and not care anymore. Don't possess the letting be as belonging to you as your creation. If you do that, you're back in complications again. Open, let be, disown. That's a beauty. Open, let be, disown. You could put that on your refrigerator. Then the spontaneity of the awakened state springs out. And he says there are three types of Mahayana students. Those who have the potential to open are intellectual people. They're interested in the subject, but are not allowing enough room for this instinct to spring out. Well, that's us when we first come to it and we hear these teachings. Maybe. Those almost ready are very open-minded, but are watching themselves more than necessary. They're trying to do it too hard. Those who are completely ready to open have heard the secret word, the password, Tathagata. Tathagata means the one who has gone to as it is. It's talking about a Buddha. And what it's really talking about is the fact that we all have this within us. It's already here. We don't have to create it. We just have to let go of everything else and appreciate it. He says Tathagata means somebody has already done it. Somebody has already crossed over. Disregarding how or when or why, you simply open. You can do it too. Tathagata. Gata means gone to. Ta means as it is. They've gone to as it is. They've gone to reality, this. Cut through all the stuff. Have experienced as it is. We can do it too. We have the instinct of awake, of openness, of coolness, in the sense of intelligence. He says the path of the Bodhisattva is for those who are brave and convinced of the powerful reality of the Tathagata nature, of the Buddha nature, of the awake nature which exists within themselves. They have to be convinced of that. The path of the brave warrior who trusts in his or her potential to complete the path, trusts in his or her Buddha nature. They know that it's real. They know that it's just there, and it's the only thing that's impeding you is self-doubt. Self-doubt is the great workaround. It's the great excuse. It's the great diverter. It's an occupation that keeps us from resting in what is real, this, here and now. Bodhi means awake. So the Bodhisattva is not necessarily fully awakened, but is willing to walk the path of the awakened ones. And this path consists of 6 transcendental activities. These are activities that cut through belief in I and other. And these are called paramitas. Paramita means literally going to the other shore, transcending centralized notions of ego. It's not trying to be real, accurate, and open, not trying to be good or kind. It's spontaneously compassionate. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael right now, and he's going to talk about the paramitas of the Bodhisattva. I'm going to say one last thing, Michael, before you start. And that is that all of these paramitas develop within the atmosphere of emptiness, shunyata, which we're going to be talking about next week. Sorry.
Okay. Well, thank you. Before I begin talking about the paramitas, I just wanted to say something about the 6 realms, that the reason why the human realm is so special is that the intensity of the struggle and the emotionality and the solidity of the perceptions in the other 5 realms, the aggression in the hell realm, the hunger in the hungry ghost realm, is so intense that that beings don't experience gap in the way that humans can. And that's our ability to experience some kind of gap where we begin to see that there's some divergence between how things appear and how things are, even if this just comes from an experience of disappointment, that this is what makes the human realm so special, that there's a possibility of waking up in the human realm that doesn't exist in the other 5 realms for that reason. And for that reason, I'd suggest that for just a few minutes that we actually take a moment to practice and take a good posture with a straight back. Allow ourselves to settle into this posture. It's important to understand that in meditation, we're not adding anything. We're not trying to take away anything. We're just simply allowing ourselves to experience ourselves and the world just as it is. So let go of thoughts of the past. Let go of thoughts of the future, and just settle into this present moment. Relax. It helps to take a deep breath and let go and do that. So it's not that we allow it's not that we create gaps. It's more that we allow them. We recognize and settle into them. And as Trungpa Rinpoche says, whenever there's a gap, awareness just naturally comes through. We don't need to create or force or make anything happen. We just allow it to happen. And then, as he says, things just are as they are. We are as we are. There's no effort, because any effort would only obscure what's already there. The more it can understand this and feel, more importantly, feel this experience in terms of meditation practice, I think the easier it is to understand the paramitas. The paramitas are meditation in action. That actually was a title of one of Trungpa Rinpoche's first books, I think before he came to the United States. And it's very clear how the experience of openness, awareness, presence, clarity that we experience in meditation practice, that just naturally comes through when we're able to allow ourselves to experience the gap instead of speeding on to something else. That this is really what the paramita practice is all about. That we're taking, with the paramitas, we're taking meditation practice from the cushion into the world. And you could say that the paramitas are not simply essential to waking up, but they actually are waking up. And in regard to prajna or knowledge, which is the 6th paramita, they both lead to prajna, but also are informed by prajna. And I think we'll see that as we go through the 6 paramitas that he presents in this chapter. It's also interesting that each paramita starts with something that it's not. So we'll begin with generosity, which he defines as communication and openness. But he says what it's not is that we're somehow being kind to someone who we see as lower than us, that we're not superior, being kind to inferior in any way. And this is because, again, as part of the practice of meditation, we let go, disown, let be, as John said, so that there aren't any kinds of identifications, no sense of ego to ourselves, nor do we impose preconceptions of any kind on other people. And this begins with generosity, because what we find is that just a sense of compassion naturally dissolves boundaries, begins to help us let go of reference points, although it's ultimately prajna that sees through all fixations. But the basic sense of generosity, of compassion, dissolve boundaries that we otherwise adhere to when we're caught up in ego. He basically says that generosity involves radiation and receiving and exchange, that again, communication, not simply in the sense of passing information back and forth, but in terms of a real understanding, a real experience of other and experience of ourselves as well. And he says as part of that, it has to transcend irritation, that if we're irritated, we're rejecting the world. And so, and that's the opposite of generosity. In other words, with this, we are letting go of any kind of comfort orientation. Not that that means we necessarily need to make ourselves uncomfortable, but we're letting go of our sense of me first. We're not constantly referring everything back to ourselves, but we're relating to things, people, other beings as they are. And for this reason, he says that Bodhisattva must experience the complete communication of generosity, transcending irritation and self-defensiveness. And with that, generosity is a willingness to give, to be open without philosophical or pious or religious motives. And very importantly, just simply doing what's required at any moment in any situation. And with that, we're not afraid to receive anything in terms of the communication, the presentation of, whoever or whatever we're experiencing. So again, I don't think it's hard to see how the openness, the letting go, the clarity that we experience in formal meditation practice could express itself in the rest of our lives in a sense of generosity, an ability to let go, an ability to be open to other people, an ability to let go of preconceptions or prejudices or any kind of reference point that gets in the way, that creates a barrier between ourselves and other people. As he says, we simply open, completely surrender, and give. If we attempt to judge or evaluate our experience, if we try to decide to what extent we should be open, to what extent we should be remain closed, then openness doesn't have meaning at all. And it's not, the idea of transcendental generosity would be in vain. So the whole idea of transcendence, and this refers to all the paramitas, although we're talking about it in relation to generosity. But the whole idea of transcendence is that we see through limited notions, the limited conceptions, the warfare mentality of this as opposed to that. And we'll hear a lot about this as opposed to that throughout this discussion of the paramitas, because ultimately, and this is again one of the ways in which prajna informs all of the paramitas, even though it's also the last paramita, prajna is what actually sees through any kind of rigid definition of this or that, any kind of rigid definition of that creates boundaries, that creates barriers, that leads to aggression, that leads to judgment, that leads to closing ourselves off in an uncaring way. He says when we look, in regard to that, he says when we look at an object, we see our version of the object instead of seeing it as it is. We judge, take, or reject, but there's no real communication. And this is what we're overcoming. This is what we're working with in terms of our meditation practice and in terms of paramita practice, is overcoming the sense of this, that, us, them, me, other, whatever it is. We're coming to see through our projections. And this begins with the practice of generosity. Again, just compassion dissolves boundaries to some degree, but it reaches becomes transcendent when it's informed by prajna, when we're actually able to see through any kind of fixed reference point or any kind of limited perspective in a situation. So he goes on to say, transcendental generosity is giving what we have, and it's action that's completely open, completely naked. So at this point, we're practicing transcendental generosity. In other texts, you read about transcendental generosity as expressing threefold purity, where there's no notion of gift, no notion of giver, no fixed idea about giver, and no fixed idea about recipient. So that's complete transcendental generosity. And he says that recipients make the gesture of receiving. If they're ready, they won't receive. If they are ready, they will receive. And I couldn't help but think of Trungpa Rinpoche teaching students who might get it, might not, might partly get it, might partly not get it. But still, there was just this generosity of his presence and teaching. In any case, he says the Bodhisattva is at their disposal, and that such action does not contain hypocrisy. In other words, there's no attempt to manipulate anyone. There's no attempt to create any kind of pretense. There's no philosophical or religious judgment, so that it's transcendental and beautiful. Being a curious sort, I looked up the definition of transcendent so that it would actually be somewhat precise. And there are a couple of different definitions. One was exceeding the ordinary, surpassing usual limits. And I think in regard to paramita practice, the usual limits are the limits of ego, the limits of self-reference, and the limits of being caught up in our projections and preconceptions and so on. That's what we're letting go of. That's what we're working our way past. And again, we experience some sense of this when we experience gap, when we experience that openness, that we come back in meditation practice and have the sense of being awake. And again, I think that the more we can feel that experience, the easier it is to understand the paramitas. So the second paramita is discipline, which is sometimes in some texts called morality. And in fact, later in this chapter, he does refer to morality. But here again, it starts with a not, what the discipline is not. And he says it's not a matter of binding ourselves to a fixed set of laws or patterns, but rather because the Bodhisattva is a completely selfless, a completely open person, which again, we can just reflect back immediately to experiences we have of openness in meditation practice. Then they will act according to openness. They just act in accordance with, the Bodhisattva just acts in accordance to what is. So in other words, right action arises out of the actual situation, not our preconceptions about the situation, not our mistaken perceptions of the situation, but by letting go and seeing things clearly, we're able to take right action because there's precision and openness in our action, in our activity. He says that the Bodhisattva in regard to discipline does not discriminate between this and that. So again, we're referring to the sense of openness, the absence of a fixed reference point. And we're also referring to some sense of evenness in terms of how we see people and see situations, so that we're not acting with any kind of bias for or against particularly, but just again, relating to the situation as it is. And then he says that when the Bodhisattva approaches situations in this way, with openness, with awareness, with precision, that they just fall into patterns. And I thought of it as an example for this, the practice of Aikido, if anyone's ever had the opportunity to do that. I did study Aikido for a while when I was in college. And the interesting thing about Aikido is you never try to block or stop. What you do is you try to join and then direct energy. So that, and you come to see that there's a pattern, there's a flow, and that you actually can join with that and then direct it. And I thought of that as an example of what he means by falling into patterns, that there's a natural flow to events. There's a natural flow. I can't think of a better word. And that because we're present and we're not trying to protect ourselves, we're not trying to judge or evaluate, we're just simply awake and aware on the level of this paramita, then we're able to join in the flow and then take some kind of action that's, again, the right action. As he says, if we're completely open, not watching ourselves, in other words, we're not trying to live up to some concept or ideal, we're not projecting any kind of preconception into a situation, we're not mimicking, we're just simply being. If we're completely open, not watching ourselves, but completely open, then we're communicating with situations as they are, then action is pure and absolute. He says, if we try to achieve pure conduct through effort, our action will be clumsy. Because if we're trying to do it through effort, then we have some sense of this and that. Even if we're not applying it to someone else, we're applying it to ourselves. We have some idea of something we should be that we're not, and that we're trying to push ourselves into being. and that makes our action clumsy. So he says, Bodhisattvas start from the generosity of openness, flexibility, and fall into the pattern of the situation. And he compares this then, he says the Bodhisattva's actions is like the walk of an elephant, slow and sure. So the next paramita is patience. And again, he says that one paramita leads into another and embodies the rest, so that they really can't be divided neatly. Each paramita informs the other paramitas, and it's more of a recursive practice than a linear step-by-step practice. In any case, here again, we have something that the paramita is not. And what the paramita of patience is not, is that we're not trying to control ourselves, he says. We're not trying to be a forbearing person, trying to become a hard worker, disregarding any kind of weakness or struggle, going on and on until we completely drop dead. Rather, the paramita of patience involves skillful means. In other places, when he's talked about patience, he says that the paramita of patience involves some intelligence, that we see possibilities in situations, so we're able to wait. We don't need to force anything. Also, the paramita of patience is directly related to the non-aggression, not forcing situations, not forcing people, not projecting and wanting people to live in some way up to our expectations. In fact, he says transcendental patience never expects anything. And because we don't expect anything, again, this connects directly, I think, to what we experience in meditation practice, letting go, disowning, not expecting anything. We don't get impatient. He says, generally, we do expect a lot, and then we act on impulse and get pushed back because impulse is such a strong driving force without wisdom. But in this case, again, each paramita is about waking up so that we're able to let go. We're able to see situations as they are, and we have some trust in ourselves and trust in the situations that allow us to be patient. He says bodhisattvas can accommodate themselves to any situation because they never desire or are fascinated by anything. Again, this relates directly to being beyond this and that kind of thinking. They're not driven by premature impulse. And again, he compares this to the slow, steady, very present walk of an elephant. He also says that patience feels space. The bodhisattva is never disturbed or shocked by whatever comes because he or she is aware of the space between themselves and situations, that whatever occurs does so in the middle of space. He says nothing takes place here or there in terms of relationship or battle. So this sense of space is interesting because, again, I think this is something that we do experience in meditation practice. We're able to slow down and settle, where we're not feeling rushed, we're not feeling impatient, we're not having any kind of agenda for ourselves, we're not trying to create anything. Then there is space. And more importantly, I think the sense of space relates, and again, this is one of the ways in which prajna, which is what ultimately sees shunyata, goes through all of the paramitas. But the sense of space is connected very much with the sense of shunyata, emptiness, being able to let go of any kind of fixed reference point so that things take the space that they do, and that we're not feeling crushed or rushed or impinged upon in any way. The fourth paramita is energy, or virya. In other texts, Trungpa Rinpoche called it exertion. And here again, we start with a not, what it is not. It's not the kind of energy where we work hard because we feel we must. So again, it's not imposed. It's not a sense of this and that. It's not some kind of ideal that we create or some kind of image that we have or something that we're trying to mimic, but rather it's a joyous energy, that it's the kind of energy that immediately takes us into situations so that we never miss a chance or opportunity. And I think, again, if we reflect back on our meditation practice, we have these moments where there's just very much a sense of the energy of being awake, of things being vivid, of being present, that there's a sense of just things being fresh. And that this is in part because energy is unblocked. It's freed up energy. It's the freed up energy of openness, so that there's nothing stagnant or uninteresting. because everything's fresh, everything's in the moment. And that's the kind of joyous energy that we're talking about, on the level of the fourth paramita. He connects this also, this joyous energy, with being completely interested in the creative patterns of our lives. That life is open, but he says life is opened by generosity, activated by morality or discipline, strengthened by patience. And now we're at the next stage, which is joy. And at this point, he also says that the Bodhisattva never evaluates that. In other words, there's maybe perhaps a different sense of this and that each situation is seen on its own merit, just as it is. There's not a sense of comparing or evaluating. But each situation is appreciated for the richness of what's already there. There's a sense of equanimity rather than a sense of comparison and judgment. So the Bodhisattva never evaluates, but he says at the same time, the Bodhisattva is not a blank, is not absorbed in the highest state of samadhi, so they can't differentiate day from night. There's a sense of vividness and immediacy to this energy, so that we're constantly involved in the world as it is. So and here again, this brings in the sense of prajna, that he says the Bodhisattva is not vague or woolly minded. Rather, the Bodhisattvas see verbalized and conceptualized values as they are, and then sees beyond concept and evaluation. He says they see the sameness of the little discriminations we make, and therefore see situations from a panoramic point of view. So I think with what he's saying here about the sense of interest and the sense of creativity relates directly to Vipassana practice. In the sense of freshness is perhaps more of experience of what comes out of shamatha when we're present, but the sense of interest and involvement and curiosity and creativity really comes with the experience of Vipassana that arises naturally out of shamatha practice. And when he says the sameness of little discriminations, I think what he means, or at least one way to understand this, is actually the metaphor that we ran into a couple of weeks back in the Tantric, the Vajrayana text we were reading. The metaphor of the blind man trying to describe an elephant, so that one touches his legs and says it's like a tree or like a column, and another blind man touches the tail and says it's like a rope. And another blind man touches the trunk and says it's like a hose or a snake or something like that. Each one is partly true. Those are the little discriminations. But with this sense here of Vipassana, we actually have a much wider view. We're able to see the whole thing, and we're able to see all of these relative points of view as well, and appreciate the ways in which they are relatively true. Maybe not completely true, but relative truth. And this again is both the energy that comes out, but it also connects to the prajna, the sixth paramita, which we'll come to in a moment. He goes on to say that the Bodhisattva takes a vow not to attain enlightenment until all beings have attained the awakened state of mind. That's one version of the Bodhisattva vow. The other version is the one that we usually take, which is to actually work toward enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. But in any case, the Bodhisattva takes tremendous interest in everyday situations, because the Bodhisattva is not so self-preoccupied. Again, it's a sense of openness, being aware of the world around us, being aware of that as opposed to being fixated on this, and he says that even though he's taken this vow, by living his life or her life so thoroughly and completely, they attain enlightenment before they realize it. And he also says that if we never tire of situations, our energy is joyous. If we're completely open, fully awake to life, there's never a dull moment. So this is the sense of exertion or energy or virya, that just, be completely open, unblocked, freed up energy free of any kind of struggle of this and that. The fifth paramita is meditation or dhyana. And here he said, again, there's a not. It's not the concentration practice of the gods. And he says that the main difference is the Bodhisattva never dwells on anything. The idea is that with the meditation practice of the God realm, that there's a real attachment to holding on to that experience, maintaining that experience, maintaining some kind of experience of pleasure, of this completely blissful state. Whereas the Bodhisattva never dwells on anything. The Bodhisattva has developed a mind that clings to naught. And the Bodhisattva doesn't set up a central authority in meditation to watch themselves acting or meditating. They're just in the experience, whatever it is, without, that kind of self-consciousness of, is this it or is this not it? Am I meditating right or am I not? All of that is let go of. And he says, because of compassionate energy, the Bodhisattva experiences continual panoramic awareness, complete awareness, panoramic. That the Bodhisattva is simply awake to life situations as they are, and that there's a continual feeling of awake. That the Bodhisattva's action is meditation, and their meditation is always action. So that's the fifth paramita. There's also in the questions and answers, maybe the first question, somebody asks about dhyana, and he gives a really good answer if you want to study and contemplate this paramita further. The final paramita is knowledge or prajna, which he says that the metaphor for this is a two-edged sword that cuts both ways. The prajna, he says, completes the other five paramitas. The prajna cuts doubt, cuts through hesitation, cuts through the consciousness that's fixed on this and that. And I think on this level, when he's talking about the consciousness fixed on this and that, he's talking about what we studied before in the sense of twofold ego, that the experience of prajna cuts through the ego of self, any sense we have of a fixed identity in ourselves, and also cuts through any kind of fixed identity, any sense of self, that any kind of fixed notion of other as well. So that, again, there's a very profound sense of egolessness that occurs on this level, a very profound sense of being without reference point, without a fixed point of view. He says the prajna of seeing is the transcendence of primitive preconceptions of the world. Now, traditionally, in a lot of texts, when we talk about primitive notions, we're talking about eternalism and nihilism. Eternalism being the belief in some kind of permanence to things, and nihilism being, a sense that nothing matters, that there's, nothing at all. And either one is considered an extreme point of view. And it may seem like, from a philosophically or from a conceptual point of view that we don't fall into this. But actually, if we look at our experience, if I look at mine at least, I realize I do this all the time, that there are plenty of times when I have an eternalistic view that a certain situation is going to go on forever, that I exist, the situation exists, and that's eternalism. Anytime we're stuck in any kind of experience of twofold ego, that's a sense of eternalism. And then sometimes we go to the other extreme and say that, well, nothing exists, but that's denying relative truth. And I think we'll study that a little bit more in the next chapter, but this is what he's talking about in terms of letting go of primitive preconceptions. Any kind of sense of existence or any sense of complete non-existence is holding to a fixed view, essentially. Instead with prajna, we're seeing situations as they are. Therefore, he says, the prajna of seeing allows for dealing with situations in as balanced a way as possible. Balanced because we're not stuck on any one point of view. We're not biased in any one direction. We're not caught up in any kind of preconception or prejudgment, but we're just, again, seeing things as they are. And he says prajna cuts through any kind of awareness that has the slightest inclination towards separating that and this. It cuts through any sense of duality, in essence. That the Bodhisattva, and with this, he says the Bodhisattva no longer experiences the irritating quality that comes from distinguishing between this and that. Bodhisattvas just sail through situations without needing to check back. So with that, maybe we can sail into questions and answers and discussion.
Jenny has something.
I have a question.
in that section that Michael just covered on patience, one thing Trungpa says is one is aware of the space between the situation and oneself. And that felt really dualistic to me when I read it. And I just wondered if anyone could piece that apart a little.
Well, when I read that, I just took it to mean being aware in this space that one inhabits. And all this language, like one inhabits the space, is dualistic, but the experience doesn't have to be. And so I took it as meaning coming back to awareness of this space as opposed to being caught in concept. The story, fixed, rigid poles going back and forth. Always that.
And I'd also say that I think what he was talking before about impulse. So, I'm asked a question, my first impulse, I have to answer, but actually I can give a little bit of space. It can take a little bit of time. And it's not a question of, separation. We're actually very confused about self and other in more ways than we can imagine. And which is why it's kind of I'm trying not to get too caught up in my own concepts about it. But just I think that it's just that we can just allow things to be without immediately giving into an impulse or a concept. I'm supposed to know something, therefore I should be answering, or whatever it is that we come up with, and that we can actually allow things to unfold.
Thank you.
Non-duality also doesn't mean that everything's just an undifferentiated blob. That's a whole nother thing, but the more we practice, the more it becomes harder to pinpoint where we stop and other things start, or even what we are to start with, let alone how it become more and more difficult to solidify any one thing and then have some reference point to say, well, this is other. Because
I think that's where I hit on the sort of stopping point was it is the situation. It includes this and that, and right, it just is one. So it felt like teasing them apart somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But great question. Marie?
Yeah. Hi. I think you mentioned when you can join the flow and then direct. I understand the join part when you just accept things as they are. But what is the direct part? Isn't it willing to change it? Or could you expand on that?
I was thinking of that as a metaphor just for what he means when we fall into patterns. I was trying to just, give a sense of, what he might mean. But actually, it's an interesting phrase that we can just fall into patterns. I think what he's talking about is just recognizing the direction or the energy in situations and joining with that. And once we join with it, then, we can, perhaps, influence things in one way or another.
Mm.
It's, I think from a Bodhisattva's point of view, it's a matter of trying to bring out what's potentially there in situations. If that helps. Yeah. It's a sense of seeing what's possible in situations and how you can, sort of join to bring out the potentialities that are there. And again, it's based on, this is why, prajna is as he says, the five paramitas are like rivers that flow into the ocean of prajna. It's prajna that helps us see what's potential, what's possible. But it's discipline. It's the discipline of just staying awake that allows us to actually be in a situation as opposed to, being somewhere else or being lost, or projecting whatever it is that we project onto a situation so that we don't deal with the situation skillfully. Miriam?
Yeah, I was going to say when you were reading that part of joining and redirecting, I just had an image of what we do as psychotherapists, with a client. It's like initially it's empathizing. So they're really angry, and yes, you join, you validate, but then you want to do something more skillful with that. And so I don't know if we use prajna as therapists, but I think with experience, you have to learn how to direct this in a more constructive or helpful direction. And I don't know that you need to be aware that you're doing this. I think when you're helping a friend, when you have assistance, and I think this is the action part, is to somehow facilitate, a constructive use of that energy.
Mhm. Yeah,
That I'm done.
no, I agree. I think that working as a therapist is one way of understanding that, and that we might have a client who's totally enraged, and we, you empathize and try to work with that situation. But at some point, there's a lot of energy in anger, and there's a lot of clarity. And clients who, for instance, are angry and certainly don't want them to express it as aggression, because that won't be helpful. But what it comes out of is a desire for things to be different. And oftentimes there's a lot of intelligence in that desire for things to be different. It's just, how do you direct that energy in a way that's creative rather than destructive? And I think that's what I meant by joining and then directing. Maria, I'm not sure if we answered your question exactly, or did that
Yeah,
help?
I think it was great. Thank you. It's very helpful.
Thank you.
You need more? Good end.
Miriam, do you want?
Yeah. I can't help myself. Sorry. I know I spoke already. I just wanted to say that you talked about the first bhumi, and I didn't experience the joy. I didn't get it fully when we talked about the Mahayana, when we reviewed that text. But this time in this book, I'm getting it. So there's hope.
There's joy.
Yes. Yes. And it's like, yeah, absolutely, unequivocally.
I think sometimes we look for joy as like big fireworks, but sometimes it's a lot quieter than that. It's just a very simple sense of contentment and appreciation, and that can be joyful too.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with fireworks, though.
Well, perhaps we should end at this point and continue the discussion tomorrow night. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, it's a lot of material, actually.
It is a lot. But I mean, fundamentally, it boils down to how we can act truly rather than out of the preconceptions and predilections of ego. How we can act truly responsively. And I'm thinking of mistakes that I've made that in my communications with other people often that happen from time to time because why? I was lost in some dream, some story that I was telling myself rather than being responsive to the individual and what they needed at the time. And really what this is all about is giving up those dreams and agendas and becoming utterly responsive in the present moment, I think, to the person sitting across from you. You know, should we close with the closing chants?
Yep.
Okay. Who's leading us?
Meg.
Meg, sorry. Okay, I'll put this up and we'll mute all. Oops.
We'll close by praying for peace and then dedicating the merit earned by our practice and study for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Meg, unmute yourself. I just muted everyone.
Did you hear what I just said?
Yes.
By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Meg. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank
you, everybody.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks,
Thanks, Michael,
John.
John, everyone.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
To everybody.
Everybody.
Thanks.
Wonderful.
Good night.
Good night.
Tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, good night.
Good night, Michael.